Heat, one of the most easily misunderstood ideas in all of science. People get the wrong idea about heat all the time. Uh, in general, people tend to think that heat is something an object has stored in it. For instance, a pot of boiling water contains more heat than the same pot full of cold water or some such. Heat doesn't work like that at all. Heat is actually a transfer of energy. So heat only happens when energy is moving from one substance to another, and this happens because of differences in temperature. So if we have two objects with different temperatures, energy will flow between them, and that energy is called heat. So once that energy gets to an object, it's no longer called heat. It has a different name. We call it internal energy at that point. So it's only heat when it's traveling from one object to another. Once it arrives at one of those objects, it becomes some other form of energy, and it's incorrect to talk about the amount of heat within an object. Heat is the transfer of energy. And when we talk about this transfer of energy, we're going to be putting numbers with it, which means we need, a unit of energy, and that unit is called the joule. So this is the SI, that's the international system, that's the system that scientists use. So the unit of energy that we'll be using is called the joule, and it's abbreviated with a capital J. All right, back to heat. Heat is the flow of energy from one object to the other. It's measured in joules, and the heat always flows from a higher temperature to a lower temperature. Doesn't matter how big the objects are, anything else, the only thing that matters is the temperature. So the heat will flow from a high temperature to a low temperature. And as that heat flows, the internal energy of these two objects will change, and what happens is that the object with a colder temperature will actually warm up. It'll get a hotter temperature, and the substance with a higher temperature, its temperature begins to decrease, and it gets a lower temperature. And eventually what happens is that these two objects, when they're in what's called thermal contact, when they're in a position where heat can flow, heat will continue flowing until they reach the same temperature. And once those two objects reach the same temperature, there's now no longer a difference in temperature, so heat stops flowing. So what happens is that when two objects touch and they have different temperatures, heat flows between them. That is, there's a transfer of energy from the object with a higher temperature to the object with a lower temperature until they reach the same temperature, which will be somewhere in between those. So again, heat is not a substance or a property that is stored within an object. Heat is the transfer of energy from one object to another.